Material is out, and we have a technical briefing immediately after this press conference. So with these caveats, let's start the questions. We move from left to right. Go ahead.
Pekka Mykkänen, Helsingin Sanomat. I'd like to ask, what sort of feedback have you received from the member state? I understand that they are quite divided on the issue. And also, are you worried at all that some smaller companies might suffer as a result, because these digital companies are often in several different layers, and there's this whole ecosystem of things. So do you have concerns with that, and then what do you hear from the member states? Thank you.
The Commission is delivering its proposals this morning, so I cannot comment on what will be the climate in the Council, because the debate will start now. What I anticipate is that there will be quite a broad support from member states and also from political groups, because there is a huge expectation on this subject. We must be conscious that citizens really expect and are waiting for us to tax properly the digital economy. It's a question of fairness, and it does not matter whether a member state is so-called big or small. We collectively need that, and our citizens, wherever they live, expect that. So I imagine that the discussion won't be that easy. It's never the case for a tax proposal, but I think this one has been, as I said, carefully prepared. We have had a lot of contacts with finance ministers, and I think this is a good basis for an agreement. And we will dedicate a lot of energy to reach that compromise, that consensus, and to reach it quickly. In my view, this should be adopted before the end of this year. Because, well, then would be in another cycle. For small businesses, as I said, we really want to help the digital economy to develop, and we don't want to do anything that hurts startups or scale-ups. And this is why we have defined thresholds which I think are relevant to avoid any damage to those small and medium-term firms.
Catherine?
Can I ask you, some member states have said that they would prefer a global solution. In one of those areas, did you get the impression that there are other countries outside the EU who are supportive of what you're doing? And if the EU goes it alone on this, will you damage digital companies trying to emerge within the EU? That's my first question. Second question is on trade. I mean, we've got this situation with tariffs being imposed by the United States. When you mentioned the criteria for companies, all of those companies, American companies came to mind, Facebook, Airbnb, etc. Americans will see this as an attack on them, in a sense. Do you think this is insensitive at this particular moment in time to launch this proposal? Thank you.
Again, talking about this particular moment in time, I reiterate the fact that there is no relationship between our proposal and any kind of context on trade or tax anywhere. This is something that we've been asked to prepare by our leaders in a summit in Tallinn. At this time, there was no tax reform abroad, and there were no trade issues which happened recently. We are really addressing a structural problem through a structural solution. And this must be very clear. Alors, après...
Now, after that, you have to establish whether or not we can act in the context of the OECD and G20. Let me stress here, the international framework, the international context is the context within which we clearly want to operate. And before leaving for Buenos Aires, I met Angel Guayo, and I said just to what extent we view positively the work that's being done by the OECD. But having said that, they're exploring a whole series of avenues, and we're within those avenues, and it's quite clear from that that there's no consensus at this juncture. But there may be certain agreements post-2020. But we feel that we've got no time to lose. And if I could just give you one reason, I've seen a lot of colleagues very sensitive to that factor this morning. There are some countries already acting, some member states. I don't want to have a patchwork approach with lots of individual national solutions, which would be the worst for the digital businesses and for the European Union. So that's why I feel we've got no time to lose. And I don't believe there's any contradiction between what we're doing and the international approach. In fact, I'd say that if our structural solution is adopted, then that could be seen as anticipating, if you like, what will be coming subsequently. So let me repeat once again here, and that's why I wrote to Stephen Mnuchin, and I said to him in Buenos Aires, this is not something that is meant to be seen as aggressive vis-à-vis our American friends, and that's why I've said I wouldn't talk about a GAFA tax. That's not the right term to be using. Once again, we're talking about the activities that we're taxing and not the businesses. We felt from our definition that we should have roughly 120 to 150 businesses that would be covered by this proposal. So a lot more than 4, not just the GAFA. Not all of them are American. Many of them are European or Asian or from other parts of the world. So I would like to reiterate that very strongly again here. It's not a GAFA tax. It is not anti-American. We are working in an international context. But we also want to be ahead of the game and show what the European Union can do. It's a leader.
Elodie.
Right, I have Elodie.
Merci. Elodie.
Thank you, Elodie. Commissioner, we keep hearing that small businesses such as small booksellers, bookshops pay 30 to 40% tax, and yet look at Amazon and what they pay for their business online and the situation in Luxembourg there. So would they be covered? How do you explain that politically? My second question is with regard to the debate with the Americans. So you have written the letter to the Secretary in the US. Did you get a guarantee in Argentina that they have clearly understood the approach which the European Commission is taking and they're not going to come back on this? I don't really want to get into that very easy game of picking which companies are covered and which aren't. We are establishing criteria to make sure that we work out in the appropriate fashion just what should be taxed. The usage of value, we're taxing the activities and not the businesses. The businesses that you mentioned will certainly see part of their activities, I'm sure, covered by this. But let me reiterate, it's a general approach. We're not trying to target anyone. We're not trying to spare anyone either. If we had come up with a GAFA tax, then I think it would be very difficult to establish criteria. It would have been very arbitrary, and anything that we would have tried to do would have been counterattacked, and we would have struggled to justify it. So we wanted to go for the smartest approach, intellectually speaking and structurally speaking and also legally speaking, in order to respond to the problems. And that's how you should understand this. The second thing is, I don't know if we've been understood correctly, but we did say a lot. I was extremely clear with the American authorities. I wanted to write Stephen Mnuchin before the G20 to avoid any misunderstandings, and I also very clearly said this yesterday at the meetings and the G20, I mean, the meeting which doesn't exist, the G7, I know we don't mention that, but I did say it there, and I reiterated it again very clearly this morning. This is not an anti-American tax. This is not an anti-GAFA tax. This is a digital tax. But don't ever forget, let me reiterate this, for this Commission, we want a legal, long-term structural solution. The other is maybe just an interim solution, and we want to avoid the interim lasting too long. So that would require then a global and European approach very swiftly.
Jean, tu avais demandé la parole? Non, plus maintenant. Oui, après. Nicolas. Ouais.
M. Kettelmann n'est pas passionné par le numérique?
Non, après, oui, plus tard. Lui, il se réserve pour les grandes questions.
Hi, Pierre Sismai from Politico. I'm sure it's a stupid question, but hopefully it's a simple one that you can clarify for me. Just very fundamentally, why revenue? Is there any way that you could just explain to me so I can explain to my readers why we're shifting towards revenue rather than profit, just on a very basic level? Thank you.
Again, there are two problems. One is legal, the other is fiscal. And we were asked by certain member states to have a revenue tax. We did not accept the scheme that was proposed, but we tried to define the best way to tax certain revenue of certain activities, because this is the easiest way to catch. You cannot identify profits at this stage, and you don't have any tools to tax those profits. We will get them. We will have a legal definition of what is digital presence. We will have them when we will have also CCCTB, which I think is, again, the future of our corporate taxation for the 21st century. But if we want to have a short-term measure, we have to act this way.
Okay. Sorry, we don't do. We have a technical briefing. Let's give everybody a chance. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Joe Kerwin with Bloomberg BNA Tax Publications. Commissioner, you said you would like to see this interim measure approved by the end of the year. If that doesn't happen, do you believe at that point there should be moved to enhanced cooperation, and or is enhanced cooperation an option, considering your concerns about a patchwork situation in the single market? Thank you.
The Commission is is a center of the communitary method. We have in that framework the monopoly of initiative, and today we are delivering proposals that are good for all EU member states, and this is why I insist that all of them should be on board, and so I'm not considering a future reinforced cooperation, knowing that this is as difficult as the communitary method and much less useful. If I look at what happens on FTT in the last 5 years, I'm not absolutely convinced that this is the best way to act. I believe in the communitary method. I believe in the single market. I believe in action at 28 and eventually tomorrow at 27. And this is what our proposal is about, and just about that.
Yes, please.
Oui, bonjour, Derek Perrot.
Yes, good afternoon. I wonder if you could explain a little bit better how you avoid dual taxation. As we're talking about revenue rather than profit taxation, it's that way that we're going to proceed. Or could you have a situation where if I pay a bit more, let's say Apple has to pay a bit more in France, then mechanically that would mean they would pay less or would have a lower tax base, for instance, in Ireland? No, they would have to have the ability to deduct their corporate tax to avoid dual taxation. Let me repeat once again, we're talking about taxing the value where it's created.
Okay, Peppercorn.
Mark Peperkorn, Volkskrant. Could you tell us of these 150 companies which will be affected by the interim tax, how many are American, how many are European?
This is just an evaluation. As I said, we are taxing digital economy, some activities with some criteria. We are not taxing companies. The result is that companies will pay taxes. But again, there is no list of companies. There is an evaluation of those companies that could be incorporated in our approach.
Ok, je suggère qu'on reste, on laisse le...
I would suggest that we leave the rest for the technical briefing. Let's take the last question linked to the package.
I would say that basically our evaluation that half of those companies might be from the US and 1/3 for EU. En gros.
There you go. Go ahead.
But it's only to the fact that we know where the big companies are for the moment. But we need to build European champions, so it will change.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Just to come back to the American issue, you have explained very well that the point is not to tax American companies, but as my colleague pointed out, it could be that this could be how it is seen in the United States. And my question is, does this worry you? Does this worry the Commission that such a tax announced at this time, not in connection with the tariffs, not in connection with other issues, but does this worry you that it could be seen as anti-American?
I think that I've answered this question at large. This is not an anti-American approach. It is not an anti-American tax. By saying that en gros half might be American, it also shows that half are not American. I'm not going to say that it is an anti-EU tax because 1/3 of the companies are from the EU. It just is the right way to create a fair taxation on digital, because one must never forget what is the basis of that. The basis of that is that there is a problem of fairness, that those companies pay in the EU something like 9%, whilst the rest of the economy pays 23%. And this is not acceptable. And people don't accept that. That's why we are acting now decisively.
Okay. Nous pouvons donc laisser le reste pour...
Well, let's leave the rest for the technical briefing, but Jean will have an opportunity to ask his question. Thank you, Margaritis. Well, you said you'd see me coming from a long way off. Just like an elephant. Let me ask you something, Commissioner, which has something to do with the digital package. It's the Selmayr case. This is galvanising part of the European Parliament. You see that the Kokobu received precisely 134 questions and is putting 134 questions to the Commission under the conditions under which this individual was appointed. This is not an affair, this is not a case, as our spokesperson has said, but these questions have never been given an answer here in the press room. So, members of Parliament would like a resolution to these issues. I'd like to know what you, as Commissioner, fully approve what happened. If during the 9 minutes during which the process of appointment for Mr. Selmayr lasted, that was his promotion to Deputy General, the resignation of Mr. Italiana and his promotion to Secretary General, did you think about the qualities of Mr. Selmayr? Did you think about what happened? Second question, do you think that there's no affair here, so you have nothing to say officially about what's going on, that ultimately this was something that only concerned the Commission bubble? And thirdly, do you have full solidarity with the rest of the College and therefore the President as well in terms of the way in which the Secretary General was appointed? Thank you.
En fait, vous voulez me faire entrer dans...
You want me to get involved in a whole number of value judgments, and I don't think that's appropriate now. This is an issue that has been fully covered by Commissioner Oettinger. On behalf of the College, it's his responsibility to be held to account towards the European Parliament and the media and so on. Let me, however, share some thoughts with you, which I think are quite self-evident. First of all, no, I didn't need 9 minutes to be familiar with Martin Selmayr's qualities, because for the last 3.5 years I've been meeting him. And there's no doubt that his professional and intellectual skills are recognised by all, and by you as well, I believe. So that was not what was at stake during those minutes. Then, like all my colleagues, or almost all of them, I was surprised that Alexander Italiana resigned and that Martin Selmayr immediately took his place. And I was surprised because it was very quick. There's no question about that. I can draw very much on my experience as a commissioner and signing up to what Jean-Claude Juncker wanted, to have a political commission run by politicians around the president. For me, Brussels bureaucracy is a myth. I respect all officials in the Commission. I work very well with them. But it's the politicians that ultimately take the decisions. If you take the very important proposal that we've been discussing this morning, that's certainly the case here. So those are the thoughts I could share with you. I know that there are challenges before us which require a very broad vision. And then we have to offer the European Parliament, the mediator, the Ombudsman and the media the answers that are being looked for. And I have no doubt that we will provide answers to our opposite numbers in the other institutions.
Vanessa, you can come up, otherwise you will lose them over lunch. Don't go, stay. That's you.